Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to 10 at a Time, the short long form show. I am your host. What's your name? What's your name? Wildlin Pierreville. Thanks so much for being here. Listen, I just got back from this awesome vacation that I took with my dad to the Dominican Republic. We went because his sister lives there. My aunt lives there. I haven't been back there to see that side of my family in like 10 years. He's been back more recently, but I live in New York. I was at school in college. I was an undergrad. My older brother was actually supposed to take my dad on vacation to Mexico, but my brother just had a baby and the baby's too young to travel and they wanted to go as a family. So they had to cancel the trip. And my dad already requested the time off, and him requesting time off is a big deal. So, I said, hey man, let's just take it to DR. I wanted to go on a solo trip. I wanted to solo travel back to Costa Rica, where I went with my girlfriend last year. There's a beautiful, beautiful, very, very black town in Costa Rica called Puerto Viejo. It's all Afro-Caribbean. It's not all Afro-Caribbeans, but it's a lot of Afro-Caribbean influence, Rasta, Trinidadian, Jamaican, like really great food, exciting culture. And there's a great surf culture there too. And I wanted to go on a trip to learn to surf. So I was like, perfect. I'll go back to this place that I already know, Puerto Viejo. I love it there. I love it there. I love it there. Literally, I was like, hey man, things are going left in the US. And I tell Steph every day, I tell my girlfriend every day, not every day, but every time we talk about it, I'm like, Costa Rica was nice. You know what I mean? If shit really hits the fan, and shit is hitting the fan, as you probably know. Me going on this vacation with my dad where we did so much, we drove across the island, we rented a boat, we did ATV driving, we almost did a zip line, but the zip line was closed. We went there too late. But we did so much stuff together, really excellent quality time spent alone, just me and him. It's one of the most essential relationships that I'll ever have in my life. And I've had people reach out to me. I shared this clip of me and my dad riding the ATVs together, and it's me driving the ATV and he's sitting passenger, right? And people are like, your dad would let you drive the ATV and not like freak the fuck out. But I've had a lot of people reach out with questions about how to foster closeness with their parent. A couple of years ago, I was sharing this vlog series called Carpool Creole about me and my dad taking a road trip from Chicago through Ohio. We did horseback riding in Ohio down to Washington, D.C. to see the monuments that he only sees on NBA TV, whatever, and then up to New York where he'd never been before. And now, after again sharing this vacation that I'm going on with my dad to the Dominican Republic, I've had so many people reach out to me and ask about how I foster that kind of closeness in our relationship. And I want to tell you, I really, really think the thing that's stopping people from forming deep, like fulfilling relationships with their parents, with intimacy, closeness, fondness, assuming that your parent isn't a fucking psychopath and isn't a demon and a monster, right? Assuming that your parent is a normal person and you have a normative relationship with them. The thing that's stopping you from fostering like the closeness, the fondness, the intimacy in your relationship with your parent is that you don't have a sense of romance inside of your relationship. And I don't mean romance in the way that we normally talk about romance, right? For the sake of this conversation, I want you to just think about romance as like a type of whimsy. You know what I mean? Romantic whimsy. It's a type of whimsy that informs you moment by moment that your relationship is alive and living and breathing and that you are an active participant in it. That's what I think of when I think of romance. Romance is a type of whimsy that reminds me that my relationship is a living, breathing thing and that I have to actively participate in it. And actively participating in your relationship with your parents is probably kind of hard because, the dynamic that a lot of people have with their parents, it's like, there's so much, the power imbalance, right? It makes it hard, especially if your parent is someone who doesn't want to kind of release the reins of like the parent and child dynamic. When my mom passed away when I was 15, she had been sick for a long time. And it kind of forced my dad and I into this kind of symbiotic relationship. We needed each other in ways that forced us to really trust and depend on the other. It forced him to kind of release the reins early and rely on me. And it forced me to step up in different ways. And obviously it was hard. It's not like the most ideal circumstance, but I think that's kind of the beginning of when, my dad started to kind of respect me as an equal and as a person, as a human being. And I had to learn to reciprocate that kind of human respect, that humanization for my dad. There was this podcast that I used to love when I was in school. It was called The Apartment. And it was two Middle Eastern guys, Arab guys, and they would invite first generation creatives, first generation Americans and creatives onto the podcast, and they would talk about what it's like existing in that kind of cultural divide where your parents don't really get, they might be coming from another culture where, they can only understand you being a doctor, you being a nurse, you being a lawyer, and now you're telling them that you're a film director, right? But that podcast really helped me understand my father as a three-dimensional person who had his own dreams and aspirations. When I was in undergrad, my thesis that I did to graduate my senior year, it was a one-person show, and the one-person show was mostly about my mom. I had to interview my dad. I sat down with my dad and I asked him all these questions that I'd never asked him before. And it was actually fucking embarrassing, dude. It was actually embarrassing. Me sitting down and being like, I've never asked my dad what he wanted to be when he grew up. I've never asked him that. Now I'm doing this project and it's forcing me to have all of these types of curiosity about him that I never had before. But the thing about that whimsy, right? That sense of romance that I'm implementing in my relationship with my dad, with my parent, is that I noticed in myself and I noticed in others that we're really excited to apply a romantic lens to almost every other part of our lives. People romanticize their work, they romanticize travel, they romanticize their home, they romanticize their friendships, they romanticize their romantic relationships, they romanticize dating. We're willing to romanticize everything. But like our relationship with our parents, it's so easy for us to flatten those into really static dynamics. Me talking about not asking my dad what he wanted to be when he grew up until I was 22 years old, 21 years old, right? Assuming that he just like knew he was always going to be an American in Florida, suburbs, whatever. But what do you want to be when you grow up is something that I would ask someone on a first date. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are all types of curiosities that I would activate around all of these other different types of relationships that I excluded my own parents from. This is me speaking as like an adult child who wants to take responsibility for the relationship that I have with my dad. It got to a point where I realized like I had only activated around obligation inside of our relationship, logistics, practicality. It wasn't very much enchantment. It wasn't very much whimsy. It wasn't very much imagination. It wasn't very much curiosity. Simultaneously, if I was trying to make a new friend, I would invite them out to get coffee. I would ask them all types of things about their upbringing. If I was dating someone new, I would write them handwritten notes. I would whatever, this, that, and the third. I wasn't doing that for my dad. And I really had to interrogate that inside myself because, again, this is like one of the most fundamental relationships that I'm ever going to have, that I've ever had. I think there are two like easy ways to start. And the first for me was, again, like understanding that my dad is a character in development, right? That he is doing this life in the same way that I'm doing this life. And that the things that might have once been true about him that I take for granted as like a random fact might change over time, and that I need to investigate those things. And that brings me to the next thing, which is that like curiosity is a gesture of intimacy. It's a gesture of permission. It's about giving people permission to feel, to express, and that like you're open to receiving those things. Here's a story. When we first went on that road trip from Chicago to New York, I asked my dad for the first time. I had a memory of the day that his father passed away, and I remember the way that my dad cried for my grandpa Tom, who I'd only ever met one time when I went to Haiti. We climbed the mountains of where my dad grew up, a place called Baade, mountain town in Haiti in the north. Tom had horses. It was the first time I'd ever ridden a horse, and I remember my dad telling me about riding horses back when he grew up, and that's why I planned the horse riding excursion in the hills of Ohio. And while we're driving, I'm thinking about the day my grandpa passed away, and I realized I don't have a memory of the day that my grandma passed away. And I never asked my dad. So for the first time ever, I asked him about his mom, and he tells me about his mom getting ill right before he had to leave Haiti, and him leaving, money and things behind for her, and coming to America and being disconnected in the 90s from what was happening back home. And then an uncle, my uncle, a friend of his, making it to America months later and delivering the news that his mom had passed away really shortly after he had left Haiti. My dad tells me this devastating story, and I think about, him running away from being in proximity to his mother's passing, this woman in his life and her passing, and then being forced to sit through my mom passing away, the cycle of that, how karmic that is. And it was such a simple question. It was such a simple question that I almost forgot it completely, that I almost never got to it. It was such a basic thing. Tell me about your mom. It's something that I took so much for granted that I almost forgot to even make it there. Another thing is, on this last vacation that we took to the Dominican Republic, for dinner, I'm making reservations and I'm figuring out where we're going to eat. And I'm thinking about the things that he likes to eat and he doesn't like to eat. He loves red snapper. Beachfront restaurant in Cabarete, a whole line of beachfront restaurants. I'm eating dinner with my dad in the Dominican Republic on the beach as the sun is going down. And I ask him a really simple question. I say, what was the name of your elementary school? And obviously he tells me all the stuff that, parents tell you about, like, I had to walk 30 miles for 7 hours and I crossed 6 rivers. And I actually do think that was true for him. Like, I actually do think that was true. But he goes through all of that, which I've heard all that before, blah, 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 blah. But then he tells me the name of the school, and he tells me about his school uniform, and he tells me about walking home, and he tells me about how he had to walk home one time in a season when there was no rain. What's going on? He's still going. He tells me about walking home in a season when there was no rain and the rivers were low and the crops weren't being watered well. And this was in a time when Haiti was reliant on coffee as a cash crop, or at least his family was. He was growing up on a coffee plantation. I didn't know that. I didn't know that coffee was the main crop. He said coffee was our bank account. Coffee was everything. We sold coffee. We drank coffee. We this coffee. It made me think of all the times growing up, my parents would wake up to go to work when they worked together in the same place at Disney World in Orlando. And they'd wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to work. And they'd both have a cup of coffee. And they'd go and they'd come back later that night. And sometimes again, in the middle of the night, right before bed, my dad would have another cup of coffee. Sometimes when I was a kid, I would wake up early, before the sun was up, before the sky was awake. I'd run to the kitchen and I'd get to this coffee maker so loud. I thought I was surprising them with a cup of coffee in the morning, but there's no way they didn't know it was happening, because the coffee maker sounded like such a big machine, dripping, coughing, jeering, grinding. But on those mornings when I woke up early, I'd make 3 cups of coffee, 2 for them and a little one for me. And they'd pour some milk in there for me. And I didn't even like coffee, but I liked sitting with them in the morning. I just liked to be there. And I knew it meant a lot to them. I liked the feeling of us doing it together and them having this really special time. It felt really, I'll never forget it. But I never knew why my family had this insane fixation with coffee. I just thought they were tired. They were tired. They were tired. But I just thought they were tired. I said, y'all got to get more sleep. But really, the fact of the coffee is that it reminded them of home. It reminded my dad of his home. It's something that is familiar to him and is universal across any place he could ever be, is a cup of coffee. And I never knew that he had that particular relationship to it until I asked him, until I thought to be curious about him. And that curiosity to me is connected to me, like being active in our relationship and really thinking about it romantically. The romance led me to a curiosity, led me to a question that led us into a conversation where he told me so many things that I'd never heard from him, that he'd never told me before and that I never thought to ask. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that I chose to be proactive enough about our relationship to put us in that setting and to put us in those scenarios and in those situations where I can, where we can be that way. You guys have heard me talk about romance and petite romance and all of these romantic gestures and things like that. But I think what's important is that those aren't just for the people that you are trying to court or the friends that you're trying to win over. I mean, those are things that apply to every single relationship that exists inside of your life where you're hoping to develop a really like beautiful sense of intimacy or fondness. I mean, not even the ones that are more unexpected or the ones that are so obvious that they're unexpected, like your relationship with your parents, dude. I love my dad so much. There's a longer vlog about the trip that I took with my dad coming later down the pipeline. And hopefully I see you there for that. This has been 10 at a time. I'm your host. What's your name? Wildlin Pierreville. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.